The morning air was thick with mist, each droplet clinging to the glossy surfaces of leaves and settling on the fallen branches, softening the forest floor beneath. A subtle rustle stirred the ferns, almost imperceptible over the distant calls of birds and the faint chatter of insects beginning their day. Beneath the dense canopy, a low, uneven breath punctuated the quiet, a hesitant rhythm that did not belong to the usual chorus of wildlife. Moving carefully through the undergrowth, Marla's eyes caught the small, still shape half hidden among the thick foliage. It was Kivu, the young gorilla she had raised since infancy, lying prone and motionless, his limbs stretched in a manner that suggested neither comfort nor rest. The usual spark in his dark, attentive eyes was absent, replaced by a glassy, distant gaze fixed somewhere beyond the canopy, as though he were both present and somewhere else entirely. Marla crouched several meters away, her breath steady, her movements measured. The moment demanded restraint, patience, and quiet observation, for any sudden motion could startle him further. She noted the irregular rise and fall of his chest, shallow and uneven, and the subtle tremors that ran through his muscles. A whisper escaped her lips, soft as the wind threading through the leaves. "Easy, just breathe." Her voice was not meant to rouse or command, only to offer reassurance, a bridge across the fragile distance between human and animal. In that whisper hung his name, Kivu, spoken like a prayer, a remembrance of the months spent nurturing trust, guiding him gently through his early struggles, and witnessing his small victories in a forest that could feel vast and perilous to a young gorilla alone. Every step she took was deliberate, barely shifting the weight of fallen leaves beneath her feet. Her eyes traced the faint scratches along his arms, tiny abrasions marked by brambles or perhaps missteps, as he moved through the forest yesterday. Dirt was matted into his coarse black fur, and small tangles collected along the back of his neck. The air smelled damp and earthy, tinged with the faint, sweet hint of moss and the resinous scent of nearby pines. Above, a woodpecker's rhythmic tapping punctuated the soft sighs Kivu released, each exhalation uneven yet strangely melodic in its vulnerability. Marla knelt closer, careful to maintain a respectful distance, sensing the fragile equilibrium between caution and comfort. Her hand hovered a short space above his shoulder, hesitating, not from fear but from reverence. When she finally made contact, the soft fur under her fingers was warm and slightly damp, the pulse of his muscles beneath tentative but present. Kivu shifted his head just enough to meet her gaze, the eyes familiar yet clouded with uncertainty. For a long moment, neither moved, bound in silent communication. She offering safety, he receiving it through trust born over years of quiet care. The forest seemed to hold its breath around them. Birdsong softened to a cautious murmur. Even the rustling of leaves from a gentle breeze felt muted, as if the entire woodland acknowledged the precariousness of this fragile encounter. Marla's hand brushed the fur along his shoulder again, slow and deliberate, letting her touch convey assurance rather than command. "It's okay, you're safe," she murmured, barely audible, her tone carrying more to steady herself than to instruct him. Kivu's shoulders relaxed imperceptibly, a small concession to the comfort that he had known for months, yet seemed almost foreign in the haze of his current weakness. The young gorilla shifted slightly, tilting his head to better see her, and a faint moan escaped his throat, low and uncertain. It was neither a call for alarm nor contentment, but a subtle signal of confusion and distress. Marla's eyes scanned the surrounding foliage, noting every branch and vine, the uneven ground, the possible hazards he may have encountered on his own. Each tiny observation was a piece of the puzzle: why Kivu had been found alone, why his body trembled, why his gaze was distant and unfocused. Time moved slowly, measured in the gentle rustling of leaves and the soft exhalations of the gorilla beneath her hand. She noted the tension in his forearms, the rigid set of his legs, the slight shiver that passed through his body at irregular intervals. He was alert enough to acknowledge her presence, yet he did not attempt to rise, did not vocalize in the way a healthy gorilla would when approached. He was caught in a liminal state, suspended between self-sufficiency and reliance, and Marla understood instinctively that her role was not to force him, but to offer an invitation back to stability, to normalcy, to care. The damp earth beneath them pressed coolly against the soles of her boots as she adjusted her position, mindful not to disturb him or the surrounding undergrowth. A faint scent of decaying leaves mixed with moss rose from the forest floor, grounding the scene in its natural reality. Above, shafts of pale morning sunlight began to pierce the mist, illuminating motes of dust and moisture, casting a gentle glow over Kivu's still form. The play of light revealed the fine details of his fur, the clumps of dirt, the subtle shine where the skin was bare, the gentle rise and fall of each careful, shallow breath. Marla's hand stayed in place, gentle and steady, moving only to trace the line of his shoulder and the curve of his arm. Each gesture was deliberate, soft, meant to communicate a singular truth. He was safe, he was known, he was not alone. Kivu's eyelids fluttered slightly, a hesitant acknowledgement, and a small exhalation passed through his nostrils. The tremor in his body lessened just a fraction, and for the first time since she had arrived, she sensed the beginnings of trust asserting itself over fear. A small breeze shifted the leaves overhead, sending a scattering of dew onto the undergrowth. Kivu turned his gaze fully toward her, the weight of recognition settling in his eyes. It was not relief, nor was it complete comprehension, but it was a connection born of countless hours of patience, of quiet observation, of soft encouragement. He allowed her hand to remain, pressed subtly against him, as if anchoring him not just in the moment but to the continuity of their shared time together. Marla's own breath slowed, synchronized unconsciously with his, and a soft warmth spread through her chest. "Just here. It's okay," she whispered, the words a gentle rhythm that echoed lightly in the misty air. For a long while, nothing else mattered: the forest, the dew, the distant hum of life, all seemed suspended in this single act of presence. Kivu's body trembled slightly less, his chest rising in a steadier cadence. The fragile balance of the moment was held delicately, a testament to care measured not in action but in restraint, not in noise but in quiet understanding. The forest exhaled with them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the delicate bond between human and animal, caretaker and charge. Kivu shifted slightly, adjusting his position, small movements that spoke of trust reasserting itself, of fear receding just enough to allow stillness to become comfort. Marla remained kneeling, hands lightly resting on him, eyes tracing every movement, absorbing the soft cadence of his breathing, noting the subtle signs of life that spoke volumes. In that quiet expanse of mist and foliage, the first fragile threads of reassurance took hold. Kivu lay still, yet the tension in his body softened. His eyes, once distant, now carried the faint shimmer of acknowledgement. The forest remained hushed, respectful, and Marla allowed herself the faintest exhale, a quiet witness to a small, yet profound, beginning of healing. Kivu moved slowly, each step measured yet uneven, dragging one hand through the soft, damp soil, leaving faint streaks of mud along his knuckles. The forest floor was thick with fallen leaves, their brittle edges cushioning his movement and muffling the sounds of his passage. The troop's distant murmurs wove through the canopy above, gentle calls that normally drew him back into the fold, yet today they went unanswered. He tilted his head repeatedly, as if questioning the source of each sound, scanning the shifting shadows around him with a careful, hesitant vigilance. The usual rhythm of social connection, so familiar and grounding, seemed to elude him, leaving an unspoken distance that hung between him and the group. Marla followed at a careful pace, moving slowly to avoid startling him, allowing him to lead the way while observing the subtle signs of his struggle. His movements were stiff, deliberate, and occasionally faltering, suggesting more than ordinary fatigue. The slight tilt of his head, the uneven cadence of his steps, the faint tremor in his limbs, all spoke of disorientation, of a body struggling to reconcile familiar patterns with an unfamiliar sense of instability. She kept her eyes trained on him, mindful not to crowd, letting him navigate the terrain while remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. The forest around them was quiet, the usual rustle of small mammals subdued, and even the wind threading through the trees seemed to soften its course, as if sensing the tenuous balance of this fragile encounter. Kivu stopped at the edge of a narrow stream, pausing to look at his reflection in the water. The surface rippled gently beneath his gaze, distorting his image, and he lifted a hand, fingertips brushing the liquid with delicate caution. His chest rose shallowly, each breath seeming to require extra effort, and soft, low moans escaped him, fragile sounds that were neither calls for alarm nor contentment, but small inquiries into the world around him. Marla crouched behind a thick fern several meters away, her presence unobtrusive yet attentive, allowing him the space to process, to rest, to navigate this moment of quiet uncertainty. The sunlight broke through the canopy in scattered beams, landing across his damp fur and catching on the moisture along his arms and shoulders, revealing a sheen of exhaustion and the wear of the forest beneath him. She observed how his hands moved with deliberate slowness, fingers tracing the contours of stones and roots as he shifted his weight. His posture carried subtle signs of tension, shoulders slightly hunched, head dipping with each cautious glance, and feet pausing as though testing the ground before committing to the next step. Each movement spoke of an individual caught between the comfort of memory and the confusion of disconnection, and Marla remained patient, letting him dictate the pace while silently noting every detail. The mossy earth and scattered leaves offered both texture and grounding, and the faint scent of wet soil and decomposing foliage drifted upward, mingling with the warm, diffuse light of the mid-morning sun. "He's not in danger, but he needs help," Marla whispered, her voice soft, almost to herself, carrying quiet concern rather than alarm. She watched as Kivu's chest rose and fell unevenly, the tremor in his forearms softening slightly with each gentle breath. He moved a few more steps along the edge of the stream, sniffing the air and lifting his gaze to the distant canopy, where the murmur of his troop remained faint yet persistent. Though there was no panic in his behavior, there was a weight to his isolation, a subtle hesitancy in his gestures that spoke of discomfort and the need for reassurance. He finally settled in a small clearing, curling slightly onto the soft bed of leaves, ears flicking at every distant sound with cautious attention. The isolation was not dramatic or immediate, but rather a quiet, pervasive presence, noticeable only in the stillness of his posture and the occasional soft sigh that escaped him. Marla remained a short distance away, kneeling on the damp forest floor, her eyes sweeping the environment for potential hazards while also remaining fixed on him. Every small movement, an ear twitch, a shift in weight, a glance toward the shadows was noted with quiet precision, forming a narrative of subtle distress that spoke more than words could capture. The forest itself seemed to adapt to the rhythm of the moment, the wind passing through the trees with a hushed cadence, the faint calls of birds gentle and irregular, and the scent of damp moss thick in the air. Each element of the environment mirrored the delicate tension of Kivu's state, neither threatening nor comforting, but providing a realistic backdrop to his isolation. He shifted slightly, laying his head on his folded arm, chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths, eyes half-lidded yet still scanning the clearing. The careful way he adjusted his body revealed a combination of instinctual caution and exhaustion, a balance of survival and vulnerability that required only quiet observation and measured patience from those who tended him. Marla's hand rested briefly on the edge of a fallen log, grounding herself as she continued to watch. She noted the small patches of mud on his fur, the minor scratches along his arms and knuckles, evidence of yesterday's wanderings or minor encounters with the dense undergrowth. Even these small details spoke to the complexity of his current state, a young gorilla separated from familiar support, relying on instinct and experience, yet clearly in need of gentle guidance. The subtle interplay of body language, environment, and behavior created a tapestry of tension and potential recovery, one that demanded patience rather than intervention. A small breeze lifted the scent of nearby wildflowers, mingling with the earthy aroma of wet leaves, while the sunlight shifted with the movement of the canopy, tracing soft patterns across Kivu's fur and the ground around him. Each subtle illumination highlighted the careful gestures of his hands as they traced patterns in the leaf litter, the slight flick of his ears toward distant sounds, and the slow, almost imperceptible shiver that passed through his back. Marla's gaze followed these movements with unwavering attention, allowing her to anticipate his needs, to intervene if necessary, and to remain a quiet presence within the rhythm of his day. For a long while, Kivu lay quietly, adjusting his position only to shift weight from one side to the other, curling slightly tighter against the damp forest floor. His chest rose in measured, uneven waves, punctuated by the occasional soft moan that was neither complaint nor call, but a private expression of discomfort and awareness. Marla remained seated, mindful of the invisible boundary between safety and intrusion, her presence silent yet grounding, a constant through the subtle unfolding of his behavior. The tension of isolation persisted, understated yet unmistakable, a gentle reminder of the fragility of young animals separated from the social bonds of their group. Hours seemed to stretch, measured in the slow passage of light through the canopy, the gradual settling of shadows, and the quiet murmur of the distant troop. Marla observed each nuanced movement, noting the gradual easing of tension as Kivu's breathing steadied slightly and his head lifted more often to scan the surroundings. She allowed him the space to process his environment, to reconcile confusion with instinct, while remaining close enough to provide quiet reassurance if the moment demanded it. Eventually, he lifted himself slightly, resting on his forearms, eyes flicking toward the distant sounds of the troop once more. Marla whispered softly, "You're almost there," the words minimal yet purposeful, carrying the patience and calm that had guided her throughout this quiet morning of observation. The forest held its quiet vigil, leaves rustling faintly in a soft breeze, light filtering gently through the canopy, and Kivu's small, measured movements became a subtle testament to trust, observation, and the careful pace of recovery in the wild. Kivu lifted his head slowly, the dark eyes blinking against the soft, diffused light filtering through the canopy. Marla moved deliberately, each step measured and unobtrusive, allowing the young gorilla to remain in control of the distance between them. The subtle tension in his fingers twitched as they brushed the damp leaves beneath him, a delicate rhythm of anticipation and cautious trust. She knelt at the edge of the clearing, maintaining a respectful distance, letting the quiet of the forest and the rhythm of passing time form a bridge across the fragile space separating them. The air was rich with the scent of wet earth and moss, and the faint aroma of decaying leaves rose from the forest floor, grounding the moment in the natural stillness that surrounded them. "Here, come slowly," she whispered, her voice soft and steady, barely louder than the sighing wind, moving through the canopy. Kivu shifted slightly, shoulders hunched, and inched forward with a careful, almost hesitant rhythm. Each step was measured, as though he were weighing the trust between his instincts and the human presence beside him. Marla's hand hovered just above his arm, not pressing or guiding, but offering the subtle promise of safety. When her fingers finally touched his fur, the contact was tentative, gentle, and Kivu leaned slightly into it, a small acknowledgement of recognition and reassurance. The vibration of his chest, faint and uneven, synchronized imperceptibly with the calm of her own steady breath. The forest floor beneath them was soft and damp, a mixture of fallen leaves, rich soil, and scattered moss. Every movement stirred the earthy aroma of decay and life, a reminder of the continuous cycles that surrounded them. Kivu's hands traced the contours of small roots and stones, testing each surface with careful attention, his gaze flicking frequently to Marla, as if seeking confirmation that the rhythm of his steps was understood and accepted. The subtle sounds of the forest, the distant call of a bird, the rustle of a small mammal through leaves, filled the spaces between their movements, a quiet symphony accompanying the slow dance of trust and care. For an hour, Marla followed this gentle pattern, allowing Kivu to dictate the pace, occasionally offering a soft word or a slow gesture to encourage him forward. Each step he took was small, deliberate, measured, and over time, the rigidity in his limbs eased slightly. His posture, once tense and defensive, began to relax as he accepted her presence as a consistent, non-intrusive anchor. He paused frequently, sniffing the air, adjusting the placement of his feet, flicking his ears toward distant sounds, yet never retreating. The forest around them seemed to soften, the muted greens and warm browns forming a quiet cocoon that contained this exchange of trust. As they moved through the clearing, Kivu occasionally paused to place his palms against the soft earth, pressing downward as though seeking stability from the ground itself. Marla remained a few meters behind, moving with the slow cadence of someone attuned to every subtle cue. She observed the slight shiver running through his back, the uneven rise and fall of his chest, and the faint tension in his shoulders. Each sign told her something about his current state, the lingering exhaustion from isolation, the residual uncertainty of disconnection, and the emerging awareness of her calm presence. Small branches scraped against their arms and legs as they passed through denser undergrowth. Yet Kivu showed no signs of startle or panic. He navigated around each obstacle deliberately, testing the stability of the ground and adjusting his body to avoid entanglement. The movement of his shoulders and the cautious lift of his legs revealed the careful balance between curiosity and caution, a reflection of both survival instinct and the trust slowly rebuilt through her gentle intervention. Marla's eyes never left him, noting each pause, each tilt of his head, and each subtle exhalation that spoke of tentative confidence regained. The sunlight shifted through the forest canopy, scattering pale beams across Kivu's damp fur, highlighting the delicate sheen along his arms and shoulders. The interplay of light and shadow accentuated the subtle movements of his body, the twitch of a finger, the slight tilt of his head, the slow flex of his knees as he moved over uneven earth. Marla's own body mirrored the calm patience she wished to convey, her posture relaxed, hands resting lightly against her thighs, ready to intervene only if necessary. The quiet alignment between human and animal created a rhythm, unspoken yet deeply understood, that carried them forward step by careful step. Kivu's breathing gradually became more regular, the shallow, uneven rhythm smoothing into measured, calm inhalations and exhalations. He leaned into Marla's touch for brief moments, pressing his forearm lightly against her hand, a gesture of acknowledgement without demand or expectation. The subtle weight of his body against her palm was a confirmation of trust, delicate yet powerful, a reminder of the bond formed over months of careful nurturing and shared quiet presence. The forest seemed to accommodate their careful progress, leaves rustling softly, light filtering gently, and the faint murmur of distant wildlife punctuating the silence without urgency. By the time they reached the open clearing, the tension in Kivu's body had softened enough for a visible sense of relief to settle across his posture. The stiffness in his shoulders eased, the small tremors along his forearms diminished, and his head lifted higher, eyes scanning the space with a newfound awareness rather than fear. Marla allowed herself a soft smile, lips barely moving, and spoke the quietest of words. "Almost there. You're safe." The simple phrase carried more weight than any gesture, the spaces between syllables filled with patience, reassurance, and respect for the trust being rebuilt. The clearing itself offered a small sanctuary, the soft earth cushioned by fallen leaves and patches of moss, bordered by young saplings and low-lying ferns. Kivu paused at the center, turning his head to regard Marla for a brief moment before continuing his careful exploration. Each movement was deliberate, the soft exhalations and tiny shifts in posture conveying a balance between caution and tentative curiosity. Marla remained still, observing and supporting from a distance, allowing the space necessary for trust to grow without intrusion. Time moved slowly, measured not by clocks but by the rhythm of their breathing and the subtle interplay of gestures. Kivu occasionally placed a hand against a nearby tree, pressing lightly as though to steady himself, and then withdrew it, adjusting his stance in a quiet, practiced assessment of his surroundings. Marla mirrored this stillness, maintaining a calm presence that required no words, only attentive observation and careful patience. The interplay of subtle sounds, the shifting leaves, a distant bird call, the faint murmur of the stream nearby formed a gentle backdrop to their delicate interaction. As the sun rose higher, the forest brightened, scattering golden light across the ground, illuminating the small details of Kivu's fur, the slight glint of moisture along his arms, and the careful movements of his hands and feet. Each gesture, no matter how small, was a step toward regaining equilibrium, a quiet reclaiming of confidence under the watchful and gentle guidance of Marla. By the time they settled at the center of the clearing, Kivu's body was visibly less rigid, his breathing more even, and the soft tremor in his hands largely dissipated. The forest exhaled with them, a quiet acknowledgement of the trust being nurtured, of the patient rhythm of care that had allowed a fragile balance to emerge from uncertainty. Kivu paused briefly, fingers brushing the ground, then lifted his head to glance toward Marla, offering the faintest gesture of acknowledgement. She returned the gesture with a gentle nod, a silent confirmation of shared understanding. The clearing, the trees, the earth, and the light, All seemed to embrace the stillness, creating a cocoon of safety and quiet progress. Kivu rose slowly, his dark eyes shifting toward a narrow path, barely visible beneath the dense tangle of vines and low-hanging branches. There was a deliberation in his movements now that had been absent earlier, a steady confidence tempered by the residual caution of his earlier disorientation. Without hesitation, he began to move forward, each step precise, pausing occasionally to glance back, checking that Marla followed at a careful distance. She adjusted her pace accordingly, mindful not to crowd him, letting him lead the rhythm of their journey. The forest was rich with the layered scent of damp earth, fallen leaves, and the subtle fragrance of wildflowers scattered along the trail. Faint traces of other wildlife, broken twigs, distant calls, and the occasional rustle of small mammals wove through the air, a quiet, living backdrop to their slow progress. As Kivu moved, the soft hum of his chest punctuated the occasional sighs and subtle shifts of his body, gestures that spoke of cautious confidence. Marla observed how he lifted his hands deliberately, brushing aside loose leaves or small branches, testing the stability of the forest floor. His shoulders, once tense and rounded from exhaustion and uncertainty, now rolled with a measured ease. The earlier hesitation had given way to purpose, the same quiet determination she had nurtured through weeks of patient care. Even in his alertness, he remained tentative, frequently pausing to sniff the air or flick his ears toward distant sounds. Each action was a balance between instinct, memory, and trust, a delicate choreography that Marla watched with quiet attention. The path widened slightly, opening into a small grove bathed in scattered sunlight that filtered through the canopy above. The air here carried a different energy, heavier with the scent of rich soil and the subtle sweetness of blooming flowers. As they stepped into the clearing, Marla noticed the faint rustle of leaves and low murmurs emanating from the shadows. Other gorillas, silent yet observant, forming a ring of quiet presence around the open space. Kivu paused for a moment, taking in the figures around him, arms lifting slightly in an almost ritualistic gesture of acknowledgement. The soft hum vibrating from his chest seemed to ripple through the grove, a communication both subtle and profound, received in kind by the others with gentle murmurs that did not startle or alarm, but rather welcomed him. Marla knelt at a respectful distance, allowing the space necessary for the reunion to unfold naturally. She could feel the tension leave Kivu's body as he moved fully into the grove, his limbs stretching into relaxed positions, shoulders dropping, head held with a quiet dignity. His breathing grew steadier, deepening slightly, no longer punctuated by the shallow, uneven rhythm of the past days. The other gorillas circled slowly, inspecting him with soft, deliberate movements, ears flicking at the smallest shifts, eyes meeting his with calm attention. There was no hostility, no aggression, only the cautious acknowledgement of recognition and acceptance. The gestures of these animals were deliberate and grounded in reality, expressing connection through posture, hums, and the careful coordination of bodies in shared space. Kivu moved further into the grove, adjusting the placement of his hands on the soft forest floor, fingers brushing the moss and scattered leaves as he navigated the center of the space. Marla watched the subtle details, the slight flex of his knees as he shifted weight, the tilt of his head toward the new arrivals, the soft vibrations of his chest as he hummed low, steady tones that seemed to weave a bridge between him and the others. She could feel the culmination of their weeks of patient observation and gentle guidance manifesting in this moment, a fragile bond being honored through trust and recognition expressed entirely in nonverbal gestures. After a brief pause, Kivu turned back toward her, his gaze locking with hers for a fraction of a heartbeat that carried the weight of years spent together. The depth of recognition in his eyes spoke of familiarity, reliance, and an implicit acknowledgement of the care that had guided him through days of uncertainty. Marla's heart lifted slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of the culmination of her patient efforts. She whispered softly, "Look what you've brought me." Her words, barely audible, meant not to command but to honor the bridge of trust he had extended. Kivu's eyes flicked toward her briefly, then returned to the group, his posture and hum forming a silent introduction, a quiet gift shared without words. The grove seemed to respond to the presence of the reunited gorillas. The leaves above shifted with a gentle breeze, releasing the scent of earth and distant blooms into the clearing. Birds, previously subdued in the quiet of the forest, resumed their song in soft, irregular bursts, filling the air with the delicate rhythm of natural life. Sunlight scattered in dappled patterns across the mossy floor, highlighting the subtle movements of the group as they explored and settled into the space, their bodies relaxed yet attentive. The grove exuded a sense of sanctuary, a hidden space where the careful interweaving of trust, patience, and instinct allowed connection to flourish. Marla continued to observe quietly, noting the interactions between Kivu and the others. Subtle gestures, an ear flick, a low hum in response. The gentle brushing of hands against the earth signaled mutual acknowledgement and acceptance. Kivu's body, once tense with isolation, now carried the calm ease of recognition, a softness in his shoulders, a measured steadiness in his movements. The subtle interplay of light and shadow across the grove mirrored the shifts in his posture, creating a visual echo of his internal transformation. Each detail, from the tremor that had once run through his arms to the soft hum now vibrating from his chest, spoke of recovery, of trust restored, and of the quiet miracle of reunion. For several minutes, Kivu moved through the grove, circling the group, pausing to adjust his stance, to hum softly, to observe. The others responded with low murmurs and careful movements, never rushing, never overwhelming, allowing the young gorilla to re-establish his presence on his own terms. Marla remained still, kneeling on the soft earth, a quiet witness to the unfolding moment, allowing the interaction to remain grounded in the natural rhythm of gorilla behavior. The soft patterns of sunlight and shadow shifted with the hour, the forest exhaling around them as if acknowledging the delicate reconciliation taking place. Eventually, Kivu settled at the center of the clearing, limbs relaxed, chest rising in steady, measured breaths. His ears flicked occasionally, attentive to subtle sounds of the grove, yet his body no longer carried the tension of isolation. The other gorillas circled briefly, pausing at respectful distances, their movements calm and unhurried, forming a loose ring that suggested both observation and welcome. Marla allowed herself a quiet exhale, her lips barely moving, eyes tracing each small, deliberate gesture of connection between Kivu and the group. The forest seemed to settle with them, a quiet sanctuary of trust and subtle acknowledgement, the hidden grove alive yet calm, vibrant yet grounded in natural rhythm. The breeze carried the scent of leaves and distant flowers through the clearing, moving gently over the gorillas as they settled, hums and murmurs blending with the soft rustle of foliage. Birds returned to their hidden perches, calling in irregular patterns, while sunlight filtered across the moss and fallen leaves in dappled gold, illuminating the subtle contours of bodies, the gentle flecks of limbs, and the soft vibrations of chest hums. The grove, once hidden and quiet, now felt profoundly connected, alive with the presence of mutual recognition, patience, and trust, nurtured over weeks of careful observation and gentle guidance. Kivu turned briefly to glance at Marla one last time, a gesture of acknowledgement lingering like a quiet gift, then returned his attention to the group. She remained kneeling, absorbing the delicate balance of connection, the gentle rhythm of reunion, and the subtle miracle that had unfolded without force, without words, and without urgency. The grove breathed around them, alive and still, carrying the weight of trust restored and the fragile beauty of an unexpected, quiet revelation in the forest. The sunlight filtered through the canopy in long golden shafts, painting the forest floor with warm patterns of light and shadow. Kivu lingered at the edge of the grove, shoulders relaxed yet attentive, eyes glancing briefly toward Marla. His hand rose slowly, fingertips brushing lightly against her arm, a gesture unspoken but profound in its simplicity. The soft hum vibrating through his chest was steady now, a low, resonant sound that carried both recognition and trust, the culmination of weeks of care and patience. Marla's hand remained still beneath his, absorbing the quiet weight of the moment, the gentle acknowledgement of a bond formed in silence and shared presence. Around them, the grove held its breath, leaves quivering in the faint wind, and distant bird calls punctuated the stillness with soft, irregular notes. The troop began to respond, their low murmurs rising in gentle waves as they moved together with coordinated ease. Each movement was deliberate, measured, a seamless choreography of bodies that communicated connection and belonging without urgency. Kivu turned fully, adjusting his posture, and fell in step with the others. The soft rustle of undergrowth beneath their hands and feet sounded like a rhythm in tune with the heartbeat of the forest itself, each step carrying him further into the embrace of his troop. Marla remained kneeling, allowing the scene to unfold naturally before her eyes. Her breaths were slow, matching the calm cadence of the group, and her gaze followed each subtle gesture, the tilt of a head, the flick of an ear, the measured sway of shoulders. She noted how Kivu's chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, now fully synchronized with the familiar patterns of his companions. The forest around her seemed to settle, the ordinary sounds, leaves rustling, distant water trickling, whined through the canopy, taking on a new resonance, imbued with the quiet significance of reunion and trust restored. The warm light of the setting sun highlighted the rich tones of Kivu's fur, the subtle sheen of moisture along his arms and shoulders, and the graceful contours of his movements as he joined the troop. Each shift of weight, each careful adjustment of his limbs, spoke of regained confidence and the reassurance of belonging. The others responded in kind, moving in a gentle arc around him, offering gestures of acceptance through subtle postures and quiet hums. The language of connection was entirely nonverbal, yet deeply communicative, a shared understanding that required neither words nor dramatization. For a moment, Kivu paused, glancing over his shoulder toward Marla. His dark eyes met hers with a depth that seemed to span years, capturing memory, recognition, and gratitude in a single, brief exchange. There was no human-like smile, no overt dramatization, only the raw simplicity of trust expressed through gaze and posture. Marla's lips barely moved as she whispered softly, "Goodbye, my boy," the words gentle, almost swallowed by the warm wind that passed through the grove. Her voice carried no command, no expectation, only acknowledgement of the quiet bridge they had built together. Kivu's hand dropped slowly to his side, fingers brushing the leaves and earth as he stepped forward, merging seamlessly with the movements of his troop. Each figure shifted with careful grace, the subtle vibrations of chest hums blending into a low, harmonious undertone that resonated through the grove. The patterns of their coordination were instinctive, a testament to social bonds maintained over time, now harmonized with the newly restored presence of Kivu. Marla watched, absorbing the rhythm, the gentle sway of bodies, and the soft, measured cadence of movement that carried them away from her, deeper into the forest. The sunlight grew richer as it stretched lower, casting long, golden streaks across the forest floor, illuminating the delicate folds of leaves and the textured bark of ancient trees. Each step the troop took disturbed small piles of moss and leaf litter, releasing the faint, earthy aroma of damp soil into the air. Kivu's movements were steady and confident, the earlier tremors and hesitations entirely absent, replaced by a calm, assured rhythm born of trust and recognition. The forest around them exhaled quietly, leaves quivering in unison, small creatures pausing in the undergrowth, and distant calls of birds weaving a soft accompaniment to the tableau of reunion. Marla rose slowly to her feet, feeling the warmth of sunlight along her back and the firm, grounded texture of earth beneath her shoes. She let her arms rest gently at her sides, absorbing the residual calm that lingered in the clearing. Every detail, the tilt of a branch, the flutter of a leaf, the soft, coordinated movements of the troop, felt amplified in significance, a quiet poem written in living form. The moment was neither hurried nor dramatic. It was a living testament to patience, care, and the capacity for connection across species. For a long while, she simply watched, allowing the golden light to wash over her and the clearing. The troop moved in subtle arcs, each member adjusting position, murmuring low vibrations, exchanging gestures that spoke of recognition and communal harmony. Kivu, at the center of these interactions, carried himself with a calm assurance, glances occasionally flicking toward Marla, but remaining fully engaged with the group. The weight of isolation that had hung over him days before had dissolved entirely, replaced by the quiet strength of social belonging. The forest itself seemed to acknowledge the passage of this fragile miracle. The wind carried the scent of leaves, earth, and distant flowers, weaving through the branches and across the mossy floor. Light shifted gently as the sun lowered further, casting long shadows and accentuating the textures of bark, leaves, and undergrowth. The subtle play of light and shadow mirrored the shifts in Kivu's posture, the ease of his limbs, and the calm flow of the troop's movement, reinforcing the quiet poetry of the moment. Kivu's figure grew smaller as the troop moved further into the dense greenery, each step deliberate, each gesture a continuation of the trust and recognition that had guided him through the morning. Marla's gaze followed them, tracing the curves of the path, the gentle sway of their shoulders, the faint vibrations of hums that resonated through the grove. She felt the lingering warmth of connection in her chest, a quiet gratitude that extended beyond words, beyond observation, into the realm of lived experience. As the last streaks of sunlight passed through the canopy, the troop disappeared gradually into the folds of the forest, their low murmurs fading but leaving behind an echo of calm and trust. The grove settled into stillness, ordinary in its appearance yet profoundly transformed by the events it had contained. Marla stood for a moment longer, letting the quiet settle into her body, imprinting the delicate scene of connection, reunion, and farewell into memory. The golden light lingered, casting a soft glow across the leaves, moss, and trunks of the grove. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scents of earth, wildflowers, and the faint traces of the troop's passage. Marla's eyes traced the final shapes of movement as Kivu vanished into the depths of the forest, leaving the clearing bathed in warmth and light, quiet yet alive with the memory of the bond they had shared. She exhaled slowly, a soft acknowledgement of the day's passage, of patience rewarded, and of the enduring resonance of trust and care. The forest exhaled as well, settling into ordinary rhythm, yet carrying the imprint of a delicate miracle. Kivu's presence lingered in memory, the low hum of his chest resonating like a soft echo, a reminder that care, attention, and respect could bridge even the divide between species. The sunlight dimmed gently, filtering through the trees in warm golden streaks, illuminating the forest floor and the distant canopy, leaving Marla with the quiet, enduring impression of connection, trust, and the subtle poetry of life lived in harmony.